Welcome. This is Lindsay Betzendahl again for another Figma plus Tableau video, this time on prototyping and why you should do it. If you haven't or had not been to Tableau conference and attended the session that Autumn Batani and I did on prototyping, while you can't see that exact presentation again, we did do a recording for the Pittsburgh Tableau user group. I'll link that in the notes if you want to see like that full presentation. This will be sort of a subset of that among some other things. All right, so first let's start with what is prototyping. So in general, or how I like to describe it, prototyping is a process of creating early sketches of a design. So that could be, of course, a dashboard in the case of Tableau users. Of course, it might be something else if you're developing like an application or a website or any type of product for that matter. So it's where you provide kind of conceptual designs, perhaps even interactive ones, and they help users see and experience how they may interact with a real dashboard perhaps, and they can provide feedback. So the process allows you as a developer to be more agile and efficient in your iterations until you have a final design that stakeholders can sign off on. So I often use prototyping to get some early concepts together, float them by a client. Are we on track? Like, does this look the right look and feel, the right potential metrics or interactivity, and then they can provide some feedback on that even very early on, even before it looks much like a dashboard. This helps me particularly really solidify my concept of how I'm expecting people to use the report that I'm building, and allows me to have a more thoughtful conversation with the client and really understand their needs. The great thing about prototyping in a tool such as Figma is that there is the ability to do some interactive prototyping. So obviously, or I'm assuming you're here because you know what Figma and Tableau is, or Tableau are, but if not, Figma is a web-based free graphic design tool. There's also a paid professional version that I use at work. And it's used for prototyping and design collaboration, as well as user testing. And it's a highly creative application for creating design systems, illustrations, and even UI and UX interfaces. So I use that because then I can build in to my prototype interactivity that I can share with the client. So I can show what filters are going to look like. I can show what happens when you click an object on the dashboard and things change. I can show how you would navigate between reports, things like that. It really helps, particularly people who aren't in Tableau as often, understand the flow of the reports, understand how a user may actually use and experience your final product. And I'm going to pause for a second because I wanted to say one thing about my thoughts on the new Adobe proposed acquisition of Figma, which just came out yesterday. If you're watching this, today happens to be September 16th, 2022, so they announced it yesterday. It's very unfortunate, in my opinion. It's too bad because I think Figma is a great tool. It gives me kind of like the warm fuzzies, like a really innovative, collaborative, and genuine community. And it seems like the folks who started Figma really had people in mind and wanting to give folks the opportunity to have a tool that was easy and simple to use, but allowed for so much creativity. It feels a lot like how I feel of Tableau. So I don't like Adobe so much, and I hate Creative Cloud. And so there's some things that I hope don't change in Figma, but I'll say right now, as we're still getting into these, Figma and Tableau videos and blog posts, is that regardless, I don't think Figma is going to change anytime soon. Even if it does, these types of things take a long time. So I think we all just need to sit tight and see what happens and hope for the best, that the tool and the community remain as strong and as creative as they have been. So that's all I'll say on that. Okay, so if you haven't heard of the double diamond, this is really how prototype fits into the whole process of, developing a dashboard. So the double diamond is essentially a framework that helps designers and developers take a user-centered approach to solving a user's problem. And it represents a process of exploring an issue more widely or deeply, which is this divergent thinking parts where you see in the first phase in red that divergence, and then there's convergence and divergence and convergence. So after, exploring an issue or that problem, and then you take focused action, which is the convergent thinking. And that's where you get into kind of getting clarity and defining a problem as well as, creating a solution. So the diamond originally was separated into 4 phases, discover, define, develop, and deliver. So you can see those first 2, discover and define, are still, 2 halves of, one of the diamonds. The second diamond got split into 3. And that's because over the years, there was some criticism that the design process, in particular that second diamond, wasn't linear. You didn't just move from ideation, developing to delivering. There was this circular, nonlinear pattern that kind of you went through in terms of creating ideas and designs, or thinking about these, prototyping them, actually getting some concepts together, and then testing them, and then going back again around and ideating again and making, perfecting them until you get to this, right solution after you've validated that it's going to meet the user's needs. So this is kind of the process as we try to get from point A, which is the user has a problem they need to solve, to B, the delivered solution, or the dashboard in Tableau in our case, potentially. So for me, you kind of have to understand or work through this whole process to get a really good product. And so that you start with that discovery phase, and that's imagining you're widening your understanding of something by asking a lot of questions, right? So these are where you may have interviews, you may do some research, really understanding, what you're going to be building and for whom. And so it's only after that you can start to really do this prototyping and sketching. You kind of have to work through this process. You wouldn't start with, hey, you have to build dashboard B and great, jump into prototyping. That's not an effective solution. But once you have gone through that thoughtful process, you can actually begin sketching the solution. And as I mentioned, you may start with some low fidelity sketches, maybe on paper or a whiteboard or even Excel, to frame out those concepts. And then you kind of work through that convergence again together in this prototyping and testing phase, where you can see if what you've conceptualized is, an accurate solution. And you kind of work through all that. So I've sort of alluded to this, but prototyping involves that user-centered process. So it's really important during those early discovery and define phases that you do user interviews and persona development and those low fidelity designs or sketches. And as you're working through that, definition phase, that's where you're reviewing your understanding of the problem back with the potential users. So you ask questions, they answer them, you kind of repeat back. Okay, so I think I understand you're saying XYZ. Great. We all want to be on the same page about what you're going to end up building. And again, the reason I have a strong focus on the user-centered piece is because, there was a time that I would build in Tableau. I would do kind of that discovery and definition. I would talk to the end users, but the prototyping, I didn't do prototyping, frankly. I just started kind of like developing and prototyping sort of at the same time in Tableau. And there was less of like the iteration and review part, right? So that whole circular portion that I showed in the double diamond, I did it a lot more linearly. Like I built the prototype and I kind of almost delivered it to the client. Now, yes, they sometimes provided some feedback, but it was less involved than I do now, where There's a lot more review as I go through a prototype before I even get to development. And a lot more iteration to make sure this is going to be the best solution that they've ever seen. And so it's really important to bring those users into that design process. And ultimately, I think it always results in a better build. So there's a number of best practices that Autumn and I shared in our talk, but I'm not going to go through everything there. These are 6 that are sort of important. I want to talk a little more clearly about 2 of these. One is don't make up data values. So I always use placeholders in my prototypes, like X's or number signs, customer A, B, C, because I really want people during these like feedback sessions or the user testing, I want them to focus and provide feedback on the design, the layout, the potential interactivity. I don't want them to get hung up on the data, and say something like, oh, customer A would never have that many sales, right? Like he only sells tables, and we know tables don't cost that much. If anyone knows Superstore, you might get the joke. So we just put placeholders so they can say, hey, you know what? If I were to look at this metric, yeah, this makes sense. I do want to see comparison to target. I do want to see prior year to date, or I don't. Like I don't want to see prior year to date. That's irrelevant, right? That is where putting these things out there without the numbers allow them to really more conceptually think about, do the placement of things, do the metrics make sense? The second really best practice that I want to point out is communicate choices to the stakeholders. What I mean by that is that you've made the design, right? Like you've developed the prototype, and it's important for you to explain your thought process. Why did you pick certain elements? Why did you pick this particular chart? Why did you pick these colors? Why did you add some level of interactivity? Why did you lay it out the way you did? Why are the filters tucked away, or why are they on the left? Why are they on the top, right? The reason you want to do this is because you're likely the one who knows Tableau probably better than the user. Right? They wouldn't have hired you if they knew better than you. So you also know why you made certain choices, both on like perhaps data viz best practices, as well as what Tableau can do, right? There's some things you could design that Tableau can't do, or whatever, pretending you're not making a dashboard, and, something else that you're building can't do. And so your design can have elements that aren't possible. But you're the one that knows that. So you can communicate, hey, I've built it this way because this is what either Tableau is really going to look like, right? The filters look like this, and that's not going to be different. Or we can't put these certain things together in the same table because that's not how Tableau works, right? So you have to be able to communicate that so that your users or stakeholders really understand the thought process that you've had behind your prototype. And I think that really helps build trust with the user, and helps them understand where can they push back on, something that they think might not work, and where they realize that, hey, this is what it is, and I understand now why you made that choice for us. And again, all these other things are certainly best practices. Calling out interactivity, getting sign-off, understanding your data and the data structure before you prototype. These are all really important. Now, iteration is a huge part of this process, and I'm going to show a little bit about that, but here's an example of a potential dashboard, right? So say this is the prototype I'm going to provide for a physician group, and I might walk through how they may use this. But here's the thing, right? The process isn't about how good, you think you are, or your design, or maybe you really, really, really love your first version. You're like, this is great. This is totally, they're going to love this first version. It really doesn't matter. You're building a user-centered solution. And if that's really true, then you have to allow a user to share and explain what doesn't work for them or what they don't like. And you have to be open to that feedback. Now, the great thing I think about prototyping is a user may have an idea that you're like, this is not going to work, or this is going to look terrible. But the thing about prototyping is that it's not final yet, right? Like you're not actually doing it in Tableau. So you can easily give them another example with their idea. Let them see both. I do this all the time. It's like, all right, yeah, let's mock it up with your idea. And, you can now make an accurate decision seeing them both, not just thinking, that one might be better than the other. And I'll say that the more that I listen to stakeholders and users and we make changes, I think the design overall strengthens. I really appreciate the collaborative conversations. And usually, I would say maybe always, the final result is better than what I originally put together. Now, I'm going to show you really quickly. I can hop over here. In Figma itself, here is that exact prototype. So in Figma, this is what's great, is I can do a lot of things on the fly. So for example, let's say, a user says, these colors are terrible. Hate them. It's like, all right, great. We can, on the fly, very quickly change these colors. So let's say, I don't want to go crazy here, but this is going to look terrible, but this is what you can do. You're like, all right, you don't like those colors. We want to go with a purple theme. Fantastic. We want purple and teal. Okay, we'll do that for you. Whatever you need. And so I can really quickly change these things without having to, individually make changes like I would in Tableau, for example. So I can do all that. I can also move things around. So say that, hey, we don't like these metrics up here. We want them over here. All right, great. We can do that. So we can quickly, I don't need that one here. We can move these things around if we wanted. I think I have some things locked here. Oh, I do. Let's unlock all that stuff. So if I wanted to, a lot of things grouped together. Okay, there we go. Let's ungroup stuff for now. Select that. Okay, there we go. So let's say I want to move all of these. Let me move this out quickly. I'll just quickly bring those over. We're gonna lock that. And let's say instead we want these front and center. Okay, sure, user. We can do that. We'll move all these over here. Right, we can adjust this one so that it fits. Well, for the sake of doing this. All right, so let's say, and then we'll say, all right, well, we really want this to be, over here. So we're gonna move this, select the measure, and we'll put that over here. So yeah, so, whoopsies. So if a client wants this, great. You say, fantastic. We will mock it up for you, and now you can tell me if this solution works better for how you think through your work. Okay? And so I know there's some things that I'm not gonna fix at the moment, but you see how quickly that is in a couple seconds or a minute. I can move these things around. Now in Tableau, that would have been a lot more difficult. I would, you can't, well, if this was a container, I guess you could move some things a little quickly, but you get the idea. So the thing is, don't be afraid to make, 5 versions of one dashboard. I do this often where I'll just duplicate it and make another one, and that way I can keep track of all the different design changes as well as maintain like the originals for reference. I can go back and say, hey, we did make this change a while back, and, do you want to go back to what we had before now that you've thought through all these different changes we've made? And so I can kind of add elements back in if I need to. So again, don't be afraid to iterate. Don't be afraid to make these changes. And that's why I love a tool like Figma, where I can make changes but not necessarily feel like they're final. Whereas, in Tableau, I think that's a little more difficult. All right, and there you have it. That is the quick overview, part 1 of why you should prototype your designs before developing in Tableau. And so thanks for listening in. Follow me at all the following, ZendallData on Twitter and Instagram. And you can find the follow-up blog to this video on my website at vizzendata.com. All right, thanks so much.